Good afternoon. I'm going to call the meeting of the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee to order. First call of business is the review and approval of the September 9th meeting minutes. Does anyone have an opportunity to review them? Questions, comments, changes, or motions?
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3 is for information only. Anyone have any questions?
Madam
Rick?
Chair, just wanted to point one thing out. At your request, you also asked for minutes of the Citizens Committee on the future of Phoenix Transportation, so those are at your table as well for your reading pleasure.
Do you have, everyone have a copy? Okay, very good, thank you. Appreciate it. Takes us to item 4. I think Maria Hyatt and Albert will come up and.
So Maria and Albert are here to talk about the results of a study that the Mayor and City Council and the subcommittee asked to be done regarding station additions to the light rail, and I'll turn it over to them to talk to you about the results.
Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm really going to turn it over to Albert because he's going to do the bulk of it and talk about the station feasibility and where we are with it. But I do want to highlight that in the interim with our changes, we recognized that we needed better bus service in this area to service our community, especially Able. And we made some changes with your support, and they actually will become effective on Monday, the 27th, where now we will provide better service on Washington to serve our 44th, 48th, and Able by providing 30-minute service every 30 minutes versus 45 minutes. Before, we had a bus that went, every other bus on Van Buren would travel over to Washington and provide that service, and it was confusing. And we felt that we could do a better job and still save money by providing that service. So in the interim, even with our station feasibility discussion that Albert's going to give, we're very focused on being able to provide solutions for the community now. And I'll turn it over to Albert.
Thank you, Maria. And so to try to go through this as quick as we can, and we've got quite a bit of slides, but they're all sequential. So just to start, just as a refresher, this was the scope as we began this process a little less than 2 years ago. And what it does is it has an initial evaluation where we look at ridership, we look at funding, and really start to gauge what the public support is. And then based on that, advance the options that would be more going into the detailed assessment where we really get into the engineering, the right-of-way impacts, and then talk a little bit more about funding, accessibility, and then from there, that's the results that you'll be hearing today. The next slide just talks to the schedule, which brings us from when we started this process in the fall, I guess, of 2003 till today. And we really, as you can see, we've had public involvement throughout. The 4 white dots you see there when we actually had the major public meetings, but we have done much more extensive through surveys, onboard surveys, meetings with specific community members and community leaders, both in the 16th Street area as well as in the 48th Street area. These are the initial options that we had for the 16th Street area. We had 3 options, options A, B, and C. And really what they reflect is in that area we have the one-way couplets, or Jefferson eastbound, Washington westbound, and they would be what we would deem split platforms. And so these were the options we rolled out to the community. This was, again, the evaluation that we did at the beginning of the study there at 16th Street, looking at ridership. Does it meet the Valley Metro policy station threshold, which would be 3,000 boardings, which is about the average when we look at the system that we have now amongst the 28 stations in operation today. Also looking at the spacing, what's the average spacing that we have, and then funding, and of course public support, again, is always very critical to these types of processes. When we looked at the 16th Street alignment options and we started to engage the community, one particular option stood out quickly and unanimously from the community, and that was option A, which is right at 16th Street. While we did have some interest both during the study and even before the study around 17th Street and 18th Street, that was mostly via St. Luke's Hospital and some things that they're planning on doing in the future. Through this process, it was very clear that 16th Street was the option that the community wanted to look at, and from a technical perspective, we know that was the one that we'd be able to advance. So we took that into the detailed assessment, and this is a little hard to see, but in essence, The blue line there represents what the station platform locations would be. The kind of magenta colors to the east and west of them would be the station entry areas. So this just gives you a little more idea of what it would look like if in fact we were to be able to put a station in this particular location. When we went through the initial as well as through the detailed assessment, we got into more specific costs. Right now what we're looking at, and again, this is stuff that is very early and things that would need to be refined, but it's about a little under $9.6 million from a capital construction cost. And it's about $340,000 from an operational cost that would be added to the system. And based on the policy that Valley Metro has, as well as when we looked at the fact that we know that we do currently have a station between 12th and 13th Street in the area, at this time, the recommendation would be to defer, and we would like to talk a little bit more about this when we get to the final slide, because we did meet with the community, specifically leadership from Evans Churchill as well as East Lake. There's a lot of positive activity happening in this area, and we are very mindful of that. We have another process called Reinvent Phoenix that has been working with this community. So again, when we get to the end of the presentation, there would be some options that we rolled out to the community, and why we're recommending at this time more of a deferment versus an absolute no, because we do see a lot of positive things happening in this area. And as we move on to the part B of this study, which is 48th Street, again, we started with 3 options. Option A was a little unique. In this area, we do not have one-way couplets. We actually have one guideway with east and westbound traffic. Traditionally, what we have today is we have a platform in the middle with the light rails on the outside of those platforms. What we wanted to look at for option A was possibly doing some type of a split platform, which you can see in other systems. This was our way of trying to find a way to minimize some of the technical challenges, specifically right-of-way, as well as operations. Options B and C would have been, initially, were more of our traditional setup where we would have put a platform in the middle and had to find a way to literally disrupt the system, because we would have had to do single tracks, because we would have had to take one track out while we built something in the middle on options B and C. Again, this was some of the initial criteria that we looked at. This is the same criteria that we had at 16th Street with ridership, cost, service, spacing, etc. As we got into the initial results, and both from a technical perspective as well as working with the community, from a staff, purely from a technical perspective, we knew that option A would be our most technically feasible because it did not impact the operations. We would be able to build the split platforms on the outside of the guideway while the train operated in the center. The thing that we heard loud and clear from the community was that while option A at 48th Street was much improved from a 44th Street or Priest, that it still was quite a distance from the facility Able as well as other amenities in the area. And there are some different grade changes, about a 30% grade change between 48th Street and around 51st Street. So initially the community really wanted us to advance into the detail assessment option C, which is located right in front of the Able facility as well as other amenities in the area. Here's a similar picture that you saw before on 16th Street. So this just gives you a little more clarity as far as what option A would look like. 48th Street's north and south, and then Washington's east and west. So if you were heading eastbound, you would be just on the east side of 48th Street, and then likely for 48th Street heading westbound. Option C is the blue there represents the track, that the station platform that would be in the middle. The yellow, which is a little challenging to see there, represents the track, and as you can see, it would have to bend a little just to accommodate the width of the station. The challenging part here on option C, and the next slide gets into what the recommendations and information were initially, is that we would have to have some significant right-of-way impacts here. To the north of this is Tavera Castle, which is protected under the Federal Historic Register. And then to the south is literally the building there is Able. And what they have is a building that's right back a sidewalk. So we would have possibly had to do some kind of cost to cure based restorations to the building because of the width we would have needed for the extra right-of-way. So this became technically challenging very quickly for us. Here's was the initial rollout that we sent back to the community, was that at the time, staff's recommendation was that while we understood option C was very desirable for the community, the costs were a little over $16 million, and due to the impacts to Tavera Castle as well as to the impacts to the building, we were initially recommending option A because it was something that we can do technically that was feasible, as well as get much closer proximity to the facility. At that public meeting, the community asked us, now that they understood the process a little more, is there a way that you could go back and try to find other creative solutions, maybe something a little bit west of our building and a little bit east of option A at 48th Street? In essence, kind of going back saying, can you look at option B again and see if there's something creative you could do? So upon that request, we slowed the process down for about 2 months because we really wanted to make sure that we were looking at every option and everything we could do possible before we came back to you all. As a result of that, we went back and looked at an option B, as well as we incorporated what would be a fourth option, an option C1, which is where the light is at on 51st Street. So here's what we did with option B. Rather than going with the platform, which you saw previously, which was a solid blue line in the middle, if you notice now, the blue lines are on the outside of the guideway. So we found a creative way of trying to build split platforms on the outside of that main guideway. The big benefit that this solution does is that we do not have the impacts to the operation. So while we still would need to acquire some right-of-way, we would still be able to allow for service to be provided while we're in the middle of this type of construction. So this was an option that we now found to be feasible, whereas before in option C, it just wasn't feasible because of the impacts to the operations. When we looked at option C1, 51st Street, which is on the bottom there, that actually is a light. One of the major issues, again, we have here is impacts to buildings, impacts to the castle, as well as we wouldn't have had room to put in a U-turn here. So if you were leaving any of those facilities wanting to head back to the freeway, which is just to the west, you would have had to go significantly to the east to be able to make a safe U-turn across the track. So when we looked at options, the new option B and the new option C1, I'm sorry, I know there's so many options, it's just, that's why we have graphics. We figured, we knew that option B would be much more feasible. So a lot of what I just said is listed here. So option B, well, it does have a higher capital cost than option A. It is something that was highly and unanimously desired from the community. It does have better access to all the amenities, specifically a facility such as ABLE and the Disability Empowerment Center, which are highly dependent on transit. It's much closer in proximity. It's actually closer than option C and C1 to their main entrance. So when we looked at these two, we were recommending option B. And so on the final recommendation, when looking at these studies in general for 48th Street, our recommendation is that we would be able to still advance options A and option B, understanding that we don't, for now, have funding identified for these two options. However, given the fact that we do not have a light rail station within close proximity here, it's a little less than 2 miles between 44th Street and Priest, and with the dynamic of the highly dependent transit users in this area around 48th Street and around 50th Street, that we would like to have council to direct staff to continue to work to advance one of these two options, especially highlighting that option B was the one highly desirable from the community, and work with our partners at Valley Metro, as well as at the federal level and regional levels to hopefully identify funding in the future to try to bring this station on. The final recommendation, just trying to bring this all together, is so on 16th Street again, while at the current time, we are not recommending that this move forward in the same manner as 48th Street. We would like for us to be able to defer, to be able to continue to work with the community around 16th Street, as well as we have a parallel study going on now, which I'm sure you've heard of, the Reinvent Phoenix, which is a part of all around the light rail station. And what that plan really speaks to at 16th Street is in the long-range plan for Reinvent Phoenix, they really would like to see a light rail station at 16th Street, but recognizing that we have an investment at 12th Street, and if land use and densities and economic development continue to have a positive growth as they are at 16th Street, then at that time staff could be directed to go back and relook at 16th Street. We have a lot of information that we would have from these studies, so we would not be starting from ground zero, and really look at the feasibility at that station in the future. And then on 48th Street, we would like to continue to work and move forward with options A and B. And while there's no current funding identified, that project staff would continue to pursue local, regional, and federal, and/or work with our friends in the private sector to see if we have an interest and support to do something with the private sector to put a station in that area.
And I just want to add that on November 5th at the Citizens Committee for the Future of Phoenix Transportation meeting, we will be providing them with information from the Reinvent Phoenix, which will include their recommendations regarding 16th Street and 48th Street. We also provided that information at their meeting last night so that they can evaluate that as part of the future of Phoenix transportation.
And with that, that concludes the presentation. I apologize for the many options and many maps, but we can always click back if we have to.
We do have some cards. Do you have questions, or should I take the cards? Do you have a preference?
You can take cards first.
Okay, we'll take the cards. Harry Ritter?
Haley.
Haley Ritter, pardon me.
Recognized by the mayor's awards on Monday. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Well, let's see. This item, excuse me while I have I'm having a seizure right now. As a matter of fact, it's okay. Nobody has to call 911 or anything. I'm just letting you know so that there's no confusion as to why I'm laughing hysterically. So, this item, I think that the extension, the northwest extension of this light rail is extremely important. So I believe that that should be focused on and completed before any of these projects go further. Although I do support the 48th Street station a lot more than the 16th Street station because, first of all, there's a bike lane on 12th Street. There's a lot of riders that use bicycles, and as I am one of them, of course. So the 12th Street station is very accessible to the 16th Street area. But 48th Street has the Disability Center and a lot of other things. And it's a nice stop between that huge distance between Priest and 44th Street. So, like I said, I think that the extension, the northwest extension, should be focused on and completed as quickly as possible before any of these move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil Pangrazi?
Over here. Chair Williams and members of the subcommittee. I just want to, first, my name is Phil Pangrazio, and in full disclosure, I am with ABLE and also the Disability Empowerment Center, which is located down near this option B at 48th Street. But I wanted to first just thank City Council for, number one, authorizing this study so we could look at it, and I want to thank staff from the Transportation Department on the work they did. And after hearing Albert, you kind of now know what we all went through, right? Hearing all these crazy options, but staff did a great job, and they really, they listened to us, and they listened to the disability community that uses the Disability Empowerment Center and ABLE, and also the Piper Sports and Fitness Center that's located down there. But it's not just us. There's a lot of business development in that corridor, and there will be more in the future because there's a lot of opportunities for growth and development in that corridor. So this stop is going to be really important to that area, and it is the only section along light rail where there's nearly a 2-mile stretch that has no stop, and this would put the stop pretty much in the middle of that 2-mile stretch. Most of those most stops are within a quarter mile of each other. So we think it's, in addition to certainly helping people with disabilities get to the Disability Empowerment Center, which we think is really important for our community, and also the investment the city made in the Piper Sports and Fitness Center. I certainly encourage the subcommittee to recommend this moving forward to City Council, and I appreciate your consideration of the issue, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Howard May? He will say he's got a microphone, but you're welcome to use that one.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm in support of the location near Able. However, I do know that prior to this going into you guys building this station, there needs to be education among the bus drivers to watch out for different spots where they may not be easy to see 88 people. I went to a meeting over there, and on the way to the meeting, a couple people sitting at 44th Street told me they had issues with bus drivers passing them up at 44th Street. And also, I know you have a meeting for future transportation that's going to be at Able, and they'll probably give them more information on this at that meeting, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jean, I don't, pardon me? Mariki?
Speak. Yeah.
Now you have a choice.
No.
Okay, I was just a little confused with the options. I know there were so
Can you bring
many
it a little closer
options,
to you
but
now?
I'm sorry, I just was confused with the options. Is it, which one you're recommending?
Albert?
I just wanted clarification.
For specifically the 48th Street option,
So,
it's options A and options B, so I can show you here.
so it's not the one with the great difference?
No, so option B, which is the one here, so this is where the station would be, this is the station
Oh,
entry,
okay.
and then the main entrance to Able is right here, so we don't have that
Oh.
distance anymore.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry, I was just confused because there were so
Oh, trust
many
me, I get
options.
confused, and I worked on this for 2 years, so.
So, based on that, I would definitely would like to see recommendation for that stop. It would not only benefit the disability community, but all the surrounding businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We do have some cards that do not wish to speak. Amina Kruk, you didn't say whether you're in favor or? Okay. Don Kuth is in favor. Jeff Sherman in favor. And we have one more that would like to speak, Gary Smith.
I too want to thank the City Council for all your hard work, and for Albert and his team. We own the Stockyards restaurant, and we were in support of the stop because of Able, and we thought it was so important. And I give Albert and his team a lot of credit, because Site A was much easier to work on. Site C became difficult. Site B became available, and they took the time and the effort to educate everybody and go through this whole process. And I think it's very, very important that we support Able and what they're doing. I drive to work every morning from up north, and our office is at the Stockyards, and I see these poor people getting off at 44th Street and coming down the sidewalk, and it's 110 degrees out. And I tell you, it's just not right. So I think not only were they trying to provide an alternate site, but do what's right for the community. So in terms of the growth that's going on and things that are happening where the stop is, the City of Phoenix has given us historic designation on the Stockyards restaurant, and we just got historic designation on the Stockman's Bank. So we appreciate all the work with the City of Phoenix and all you've done to help us out. And this area is becoming very important. There's a lot of great things going on. So I too support B, and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you very much. That's all the cards I have. Questions, discussion? Motion?
I guess
Councilwoman?
discussion. So I have been able to visit SPOFIT and been able to have a tour, and have spoken to many of those that take our light rail and transportation to and from Able. And one of my, I promised I would be their advocate and their voice in making sure that the stop was closer to them. I witnessed the fact of the stop on 44th Street and actually going up the Stockyard area. There's a little hill, and it becomes very difficult for some. And they take their time and they get there, and I think really they had their workout really at that point, but they continue to go to SPOFIT. And so I am glad to hear and pleased to hear that the able community is accepting this recommendation, because that's really where I was going to be at. And I'm really proud of the staff taking, listening, hearing the concerns, and really being proactive and working with the community to come to a win-win. So I really appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
Thank you. Great news. I think on the 48th Street, it's very exciting that we've able appreciate everyone's patience and working together to try to find a good outcome. I know I learned personally, and I'm sorry everyone gets to hear about this again, but when I had my seizure and couldn't drive, how key the public transit system is for people who don't have the ability to hop in a car. And so I think this will be a good outcome, and appreciate everyone being involved in making this work. I represent the station area around the other station, and it has been a real priority for the community in the Reinvent Phoenix process to discuss transit-oriented development in this station. So right now the recommendation is do not advance at this time, and I would like to suggest an amendment to that, because we have put all this effort into the Reinvent process, and we're very close to the conclusion that we, once we have that report, that we revisit this and see what we can do in this area, because people have worked so hard, and I don't want to give them this final bad news as we're close to the report. So if that would be okay with staff and the subcommittee, then I would move staff's recommendation on 48th Street and on 16th Street that we revisit at the conclusion of Reinvent.
Yeah, and Chair Williams and Councilwoman Gallego, the Reinvent Phoenix grant is we're going to be working on it throughout the end of the year, so that would be a time where we can be able to kind of see where that report's at that time, and then circle back specifically regarding to 16th Street and see where we are at.
Right, because it was a really important part of the vision of this community, and so we want to know, want to support that and see what we can do to make this work with being respectful of the analysis.
Councilman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be clear on that, I'm sorry, was there a motion or?
Yeah, motion was staff's recommendation on 48th Street and on 16th Street, instead of do not advance, that we wait for the Reinvent Phoenix to evaluate with that data.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a
Okay.
second now.
Okay, so on this motion, just being clear then, this isn't committing any money at this time to any project. It's simply just continuing further with further evaluation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, throughout the project, we did make it clear that we had no funding identified for this. It was a technical assessment, as well as getting a pulse from the community as to the need for these stations, and so we have that information. That's what we're moving forward.
Yeah, well, I remember when this item first came to the council, and appreciate the process that you've gone through on this. I think it's a good model for further, because we know this won't be the last request for additional stops. So I think you've gone about this in the right way, and gotten a great amount of community input. So I will be supportive of this motion.
Thank you. I have not been a big fan of adding stations. However, I think this one is due special consideration. I think Abel has presented a very good case, and I understand that every time we add a stop, it slows us down, and that was one of the reasons initially that it wasn't put there. But I think this site does warrant consideration. I am going to support the motion, but I also want you to go look for additional funding for this. We have priorities established pretty firmly, and I want to make sure that those are considered top priorities, but I don't want this to slip through the cracks either. I'm not saying that, so I will support the motion. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much for all your hard work, and I know you put hours and hours, and all the members of the community who have been very involved and will continue to be involved in this. And hopefully you could go out and look for some private partnerships that might be willing to have the station named after them and contribute in some way. I mean, it's time to be creative, and we appreciate all your support. Thank you very much. We will go to the next item, which is update on private street policy, and I'm sure there's nobody here that's interested in this.
Madam Chair and subcommittee members, this item was added to the agenda at the request of Councilman Gates, who had been working with some specific neighborhoods on some challenges related to private streets and their current condition. And it's been a number of years. I was actually here when the city council originally set up the policies that are still in existence today with regard to private streets and how they might be maintained, and also how they could transition and become public streets. And there's a set of complicated issues involved in this. We've got a number of private streets throughout the city, and we thought the best approach to this today would be to review with you the entirety of the situation across the city and the key issues at stake here. We don't have any particular recommendations. We've laid out some ideas for how to move forward, but I would imagine that you're going to send us off to do some more work on this and then come back with maybe more specific options for you to vote on at a future meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray Dovalina and Kenny Knudsen, the acting Street Transportation and Assistant Street Transportation Director.
Thank you, Rick. Madam Chair and committee members, this just provides an overview of how we deal with private streets and some of the history and the inventory that we have and the mechanics. You got it. Sorry. To note also, this does cross along other departments with the water services department, the neighborhood services, a lot of other departments that we work with, and as well as communities work with code regulations and things of that nature. Starting off with just the inventory of what we have out there, we have close to 5,000 miles of public streets. In looking at some of the background on private streets, I was estimating that we roughly would have around 10% of as compared to our public streets. So we roughly have about 450 miles. Of that, since early 90s, we've doubled that. We had, at that point, we had about 180 miles, but we've surpassed that. We're up to about 450 miles across the city. And as you can see that map, all the red dots basically show all the different private streets that exist across the city. They're immersed across the whole city. Primarily just local streets, and they're all over the place, as you can see that. Following how we've been historically addressing private streets and how we've been maintaining, in 1973 we did have some minor maintenance that was okayed by the city, and we were doing some of that work up until that point. And then 10 years later, in the 80s, at the time, the city attorney had some concerns about the liability of just doing maintenance out there and some of the liable items that could happen with injuries, things of that nature, regarding just the minor maintenance. And then following that, the issue of the gift clause came to be in the mid-80s, where the work that we were doing in these private streets, because they were private, keeping in mind that there are public infrastructure in those private streets. We have water, sewer, things like that we use for daily purposes that are public infrastructure, as well as trash collection. So some of these streets provide access to trash collection. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of other activities that are public that are in the private streets. So from that point in mid-80s, there was a ordinance adopted by the council that created the dedication process of how you could dedicate a private street into the city. At the same time, we did send out an assortment of letters to all of the at that point established HOAs across the city. Keeping in mind that there could have been, and there were probably one or two that were not established HOAs for whatever reason that would have happened. And that clarified how a private street could, in turn, move to a public street. So going into sort of the dedication process, there is the existing processes. Typically, it's not in a collector arterial. It's typically a local street. Um, we need to have full access, so it can't be gated. So if you can imagine, there's private streets that are gated, and there's private streets that are open. There's no gates. There's minimum requirements for design with regards to the city of Phoenix, and as well as sometime in the early 90s, we started requiring sidewalks for ADA accessibility. So if you can imagine, before that, there was no requirements for sidewalks. So there's different design standards that were not in place prior to the 90s. So there's 3 steps. The owner, the homeowner association, or an entity of people can request the city to look at converting these streets to public. We have a sort of a pass-fail criteria, and then we do have an on-site inspection that we do from staff to evaluate what are the requirements to bring up that street to current standards. Also with that, there are some upgrades, as you can imagine. If they're older, there are going to be some substantial upgrades that would have to be needed for that street to move forward. And then you go into a process where the application is a formal application, then that gets submitted to the city. And then the third step is when there's some stipulations added to that request for that street to be brought up to current standards.
Ray, at that point, did the HOA or the owners of the private street, were they required to pay for the upgrades to bring it into compliance?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, at this point, yes, that's been the process, and I'll share some of the things that we've done. But typically, we've used the improvement district process, where a collection of people can convert the street to a public if they collectively all agree and they assess themselves either through an improvement district or the HOA assesses themselves to create that opportunity. So moving forward with some of the current issues that we're dealing with private streets, and again, they're just current aspects. One is a lot of these are opportunities for development and some of the infill areas where they're smaller in size, and to do the normal standards for city standards, it would require more land, and so there's a deterrent of not trying to do that so they can maximize their development. So there's some issues with some of the infill areas where if they can do a private street, they can maximize their development to provide housing or things like that. The other issue is HOAs. There's been some dissolving of HOAs that NSD, our sister department, is dealing with HOAs that are just going out of business. They just can't get the number of residents to be associated with the HOA because of the economy, the recession. They've lost a lot of that. And so not only are we talking about private streets, but also you could have detention basins, retention basins, flood control systems that are actually maintained and operated by the HOA or the entity, private entity. Again, in most cases, the maintenance aspect has been deferred. In discussions, previous discussions with the Home Builders Association, there's been situations where the developers, they do set aside at the beginning a reservation of funds to commit for the HOA to have to address maintenance issues. But as time goes on, 5 years, it's like a warranty period. Beyond that point, if you don't take care of that, it's going to be a challenge in the future. And so what we're seeing is between 15 to 20, 25, even beyond that, there's some challenges with some of these HOAs that are not being able to maintain their private elements. Again, there's some the city dedication process generally for residential, but we do have some areas that have commercial and employment sites as well. So that's another consideration that we haven't had at this point, but that's something else that we might have to look at to address that. And then also the gift clause, and how do we address the gift clause? Typically, in the current process is that the whole system would have to be dedicated to the city, but with the improvements done. Is there a way to do something different than that? And there are some challenges with that, because if you dedicate a road, and if there's going to be funding from the city with that road, it needs to be fully dedicated to the city. and there's challenges with that because you're not going to have right-of-way, or the right-of-way is going to be less. It's might not have streetlights, might not have sidewalks. So there's different things that need to happen before the dedication can happen. But that's sort of the challenges that we're looking at. And then also the public street infrastructure standards. They're a lot higher now. As time goes on, the standards keep on changing with things that we add on for accessibility, for streetlight standards, things like that. So to upgrade, there's a lot of cost to upgrade to the current standard. Maybe it might have been different 20 years ago where we didn't have ADA compliance, we didn't have certain things that might have been cheaper to do at that time. But at this point, there are some major elements that need to be added to an infrastructure that's private. And then the next slides, we're just going to show a couple examples of residential and commercial. This first one is actually called the Gold Key Racket Club Estates. It's south of Thunderbird, from Central Avenue to 3rd Street, just south of Woods Drive. And you can see it's basically north of the North Mountain. That area originally got developed. For the most part, all of the streets north of that area, that's sort of that triangle piece that you see in the middle there. North of that area, they're all public streets, but south to that triangular piece area, they're all private streets. And so that's one of the communities that have come to the city to seek some assistance on how do we address that community. This next one is a commercial example. This is 48th Street, south of Baseline. It runs through the South Point Resort. And there were some things that were done previously with zoning changes, with different things that changed the area, that went through a process, through the city council process, that changed some of the traffic onto 48th Street. And basically it runs here. It runs, this is the portion, this north-south portion here. This is 48th Street. I'm sorry. Yeah, let me do this. 48th Street is this one right here. And then it turns into, sorry. Yeah, 48th Street comes from Baseline on the top here, and then it goes down, and then goes to South Point Parkway. So this whole area, all the way down to Guadalupe, is a private street. And it actually is acting like a major collector at this point. Yes. And if you're riding on I-10 and you're trying to avoid the traffic congestion on I-10, you're definitely going to be using 48th Street to get up to Phoenix area. So kind of moving forward with the processes that we have right now is, again, an improvement district. Normally that's the property owners have to agree to tax themselves and pay for the funding for that, for converting the street. Also the issues with the HOAs, we're working with Planning and Development Department and NSD to look at to the law, with law department, and looking at what can we do, not only moving before but also moving forward. What are the things that we need to be putting in the development standards, development requirements, to see how we can better define these things moving forward. The private street dedication procedures, we already have that, but it's only for residential, and like as I showed, I mean, there's residential and also commercial situations. And then some of the development requirements kind of moving forward, what are the development requirements that we need to be looking at? Do they need to be more stringent? Do they need to be looked at in a different way moving forward? So that's the presentation that we have today regarding this topic.
And Madam Chair, just to summarize, I mean, from that map, you can see that this affects the entire city, hundreds of miles of streets. That yellow is not, I was really shocked when I saw this map at how widespread that this is. And so as we evaluate individual cases, we have to think about the overall policy implications and what ultimately effect it may have across the city. And so we would be very interested in hearing from you either any particular areas you would like us to do some further work on, any particular problem areas that you're experiencing in your districts or you've heard about throughout the community, and sort of help us develop a work plan here going forward that we could bring back to you on potential revisions to the policies.
Thank you. I recognize this is a very real problem. I didn't realize that it was so huge. I've dealt with a couple in my district, and I know at that time they didn't have a choice. They had to bring it up to standards and widen and do all the other. But I think absolutely we need to make some changes on different levels, coming or going, or even commercial versus residential. So I think this is very timely. I thank you, Councilman Gates, for bringing this forward, because I think this is something that we need to address now, because knowing street repairs and how many are needed throughout the city, this compounds the problem even further, and so I think it is very timely, so thank you. So would you like to make some comments and start us off?
Well, actually, thank you for those comments, Madam Chair. Appreciate you putting this item on the agenda. I think we have a number of folks here from the Gold Key community, and I think they might have some ideas on how they want to structure their time, so I just wanted to make you aware of that.
I take the cards as I have them, unless you have a particular order that you wanted to go in.
I think maybe, do we have 5? Is that right? We have 5 cards?
He's
Oh.
going to donate the time.
Yeah.
Everybody's donate to you, John. Okay.
I appreciate it. It's the first time everyone's donated time for me to speak, so I'll still
Don't know
try
you
to
like we do. No,
be brief.
just
I'm John Seifert, and full disclosure, I used to work for the Street Transportation Department, and I've retired about 3 years ago and been involved with this committee for about 2 years on the private street issue in Gold Key Racket Club. I passed out this thing that kind of provides history and background information on the Gold Key Racket Club streets and some of the work that we've been doing with the Street Transportation Department, mostly for about the last 3 years on creating an improvement district. And we've also talked about the possibility of a cost-sharing agreement with the city, but that would be something that would have to be approved through this group and also approved through the city council. But Ray did point out that there are a number of issues, a huge number of issues that have to work through to get to that point. But we're also, just to kind of go back to the beginning, we feel like we're kind of like in that whole sea of private streets, that we're a very unique situation. When the developer at that time, Dell Trailer, created the subdivision, the plat originally started out as a private street subdivision, and it had a language in it for a homeowners association. Apparently, homes weren't selling too well under that situation back in 1976, so within 30 days, he submitted an amended plat. And with that amended plat, the language from the homeowners association was completely stricken from the plat. There was language at that point in time, there was an easement dedicated to the streets department for the ongoing repair and maintenance of the streets. And also, additionally, the tennis club, which is called Track D in the plat, they were specifically exempted from any maintenance of private streets that was dedicated to the streets. So we move fast forward to 1986, and that's when the city attorney at that time, I think that's when Rick said he was involved with the process, they had determined that maintaining private streets was a violation of state law. Subsequently, the streets department sent letters to all the HOAs that they had records of. Now, the dilemma and the problem that created for us is we had no HOA, so none of the residents were ever notified back in 1986. The plats were not changed to reflect this change, and there was no recording document at Maricopa County. So for all the transactions that occurred subsequently, none of the present homeowners have ever been properly notified of this dilemma that we have. So it's created some confusion, and we have all these titles that are clouded. So moving forward to, there were a couple attempts to create an HOA or to collect some money, and it was voluntary and so people generally in the subdivision did not like the idea of an HOA, so that did not have any traction. And when people decided to try to collect money, some people said, well, I'll participate as long as my neighbors participate. But getting 45 properties to fully agree, that didn't work out as well. So about 3 years ago, we engaged Street Transportation Department, and we've been working with them on putting together an improvement district, which we did the initial petitioning, and a lot of the people believe that, you know, we had 84% agree to that, but that is with the understanding that there might be some sort of arrangement with the city to help out. In addition to that, we asked them to weigh in whether they like streetlights. We're a subdivision without streetlights, and it's a city council policy that was adopted back in 1987 when the system was taken over from APS and SRP. And our neighborhood, they enjoy the dark streets. We had 87% of the people saying, we're fine with it. Now, that wouldn't preclude us from not having streetlights. We could always individually request through the mid-block streetlight program to individually put streetlights back in if that individual would do the petitioning and get approval and finance it himself. So we've been, so that brings us up today. So we're looking, hopefully, for the subcommittee to direct staff to go back and look at options, to take a look at some of these very unusual, very unique situations and see if there's something within the private street policy that would allow us to go forward with that.
Anyone have questions?
I'll wait till,
Okay.
are we ready?
No, I'm not clear on where you are with an improvement district.
Okay, we did the initial petitioning back in the spring. We have 84% people saying yes.
And how many do you have to have? Is that sufficient?
Madam
Yeah,
Chair.
that's sufficient.
Yeah,
I'm at
Madam-
70%.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we normally start off with just a blanket petition, and we normally want to get about 70%. And then that's sort of the initial process before we go into an official balloting, where the official balloting, you only need 51%.
Okay, now, let me ask you this. I am assuming that then you have to have some type of cost analysis on what it would take to bring them up to these standards today.
They do.
Okay. And then, based on what you previously said about the public use on this, by law, can we then assume a percentage based on the public use of our responsibility as part of that district? Are you following me? Am I?
I think
That's-
that is a question we need to discuss with the city attorney in terms of how do you evaluate in a private street situation the impact of public use on the
Private street.
the condition of the private street. And so we would do that privately with the city attorney and provide some legal advice on that issue.
Because I mean, that to me sounds fair based on what, I mean, I know where you're coming from, and I don't, you know, I'm fighting for every penny I can get for street repairs in my district, but fair is fair. And when it's a public use, even though it's on a private, I'm surprised you're not paying them rent.
Exactly.
Well, we do have a public business within the community. The Racket Club is a public business.
Well, that, yeah, and
and
who
so-
determined it's public? Is it from the get-go, it's public?
Yeah, from the get-go.
When it got, Madam Chair, when it got platted, all the streets that you see there, they're actually under a tract that is owned by the Racket Club owner. So
But it's a public facility.
it's an open private gate facility.
You lost me.
Public.
So,
that
so they're private streets, but they're open to the, I mean,
Public.
Yeah.
they're open to the public. There is no gates in that area.
Right.
It's open to the public, so public use.
The public is using the streets to get to
Yes.
that
Right.
with the city's permission,
Yes.
authorization.
Yeah.
Correct.
If I could clarify that, the plat also reserved an easement for the general public to use the streets to come and go.
Yes.
So that's part of the plat, and that's part of the legal thing. The other thing, we're right next to the Shawview Trailhead, and, you know, a bunch of people use it right there, so.
Right, they would be cutting through to get to the trailhead. Okay, okay, Thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't know all the details, for instance, how much, when you did the surveying, how much city participation was anticipated and those kinds of things, but we would be happy, of course, to work with the specific neighborhood. And I think some of you have, but I've received some emails from the neighborhood, people who live in the neighborhood asking us to sit down and try to figure this out with them. But again, we'll have to work with the law department to balance the prohibition on providing a gift by doing work on a private street with whatever public benefit or public harm might have been done as a result of public use of the street.
At that point, I think, I'm not sure gift is the right word.
Right. Yeah,
So,
because public.
Yeah, because the public is
Mhm.
actually using it. So, in a way, I see it as the reverse is true right now. The neighborhood's giving the gift to the city. So, I think that this is, I know this is your lead, but.
Keep going. I like what you're saying.
One of my questions, because this is, I got the emails, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Councilman Gates regarding all the dynamic. But in reading this, in 1976, there's no, when my understanding is there's no HOA.
There's absolutely, we have no authority to self-assess.
But then in 1986, this change came about
That was when the city attorney indicated that it was a violation of state law.
regarding HOAs. You know, those that have HOAs, how I'm interpreting, notifying the HOAs that a letter was sent from Street Transportation Department notifying HOAs. If there is no HOA, then there is a community that is left out of this process or being informed. My question is, this happened in 1986. This development had already happened, been built, was established. Why isn't this grandfathered as?
Jeannie's gonna. Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, it is grandfathered into the process. The process that's been set up for private street dedication that was set up in 1986 allowed private streets that were built prior to 1986 that meet the criteria to be part of the application process. So the process that John explained, it's just part of the application process. If he was to go through that process and say, we want to dedicate our streets to the city, they would go through the analysis where we'd go out and do an analysis of the streets, see what upgrades need to be done, and then they would be responsible to provide those upgrades before the council could accept those as public streets.
I guess what I am saying is this happened way before 1986. In 1986, the city decided to change their policy for whatever reason. Those, I guess I'm going to get myself into a pickle, but those from 1986, before 1986, then is grandfathered where they do not have to participate in this process. Obviously there was and I will go do my research, but there was a process obviously already happening with this community, and something was going on with this community. And now all of a sudden we change the rules, we do other things, this is how you do it. Now you have to dedicate it public. And in dedicating it public, you have to do these following things.
So Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, what happened was that up to that point, the city was maintaining minor maintenance. There was no process, no procedure of dedicating private streets to the city or converting them to public streets. So at that point in mid-'80s, there was a decision made to basically inform everybody to say, okay, we're going to stop doing the minor maintenance, and then here's a process to convert your private streets prior to 1986 to public streets. That's what kind of happened at that point.
So they are grandfathered. In other words, if this was built after 86, there is no process.
There's no process
currently for them to dedicate to the city. But prior to 86, we were doing maintenance on these streets.
Correct.
The city attorney opined that we could not do that maintenance anymore, But the option was offered to people, although obviously these folks weren't notified because they didn't have an HOA. The option was offered to people, if you want to turn it over to us, then we'll continue to maintain it into the future. But if it's substandard, you got to fix it before we take it. So that's sort of the way it evolved, right, Tom Kello?
So then you know the history as to why it came about. I do. Okay. So you and I will speak later.
But I think part of the challenge for people is the tremendous cost it takes to bring these up to our standards in many of the yellow that you saw up there. Ignore everything after 86. All of those streets that were built before 86, that generally it's hard for the homeowners to pay for the maintenance. They want the city to take over maintenance, but our requirement to bring it up to city standard is an impediment for people to get there. And that's the struggle I think that we're having, and why some neighborhoods feel that the city ought to be responsible for a portion of the cost of bringing it up to the standard.
Councilwoman, if I may add, I think if we had an HOA, if we somehow could create an HOA, I don't believe we would be in this position today. I think we would go ahead and say it costs so much and we would just resolve that issue. But put in that predicament where we don't have the HOA, we don't have any way to create one unless everyone wants to volunteer in. And that's just not going to happen in our residence. So.
And is the 155,000 sort of an accurate?
It's up a bit.
Okay.
That was an initial estimate, and Ray would have more recent numbers.
I'm just trying to think through, if we have 5,000 miles and 20% want to become public, like what are we talking about here?
It's a big number.
Okay.
It's 200 miles. And
I have some questions that aren't specific to this HOA, so I don't know if we're ready to move more generally, or I don't want you to stuck standing.
Sure.
I think I have one more card, and I'm not sure. Mary Bartlett, are you from this area, or did you?
She's from a different one.
Okay, but you like to speak. Okay, John. Thank you. Mary, would you like to? Yes, please.
Oh, they have a mic, a floating mic somewhere.
Yeah.
For your fans watching online, they can hear you better.
My name's Mary Bartlett. I'm the president of Tamarack Moon Valley Homeowners Association. Gosh, we are a lot more simple. I am really glad I'm not a member of Gold Key. This is really simple compared to that. We have gone through the pre-application review. We have had your council member come out and take a look at our streets. We must have had a really good builder, because we do have to have some corrections to our streets, but not a major amount of correction. So we are interested in turning the streets over as public streets for the long-term benefit of our homeowners. We would like that to go forward. We have taken a vote of the homeowners. We have an 86% approval rate of turning this over to the city for public streets. Our cost to do this ourselves at this time would be right around $230,000. We have, and you know, it's only less than a mile. Our streets are less than a mile, so all that 480, we have just a little bitty portion of it. But it probably would be beneficial to the city too. We have a school right next to us, and that school, the parents in the school use our streets all the time for pickup of children. They park there. Of course, we've got all the trash trucks that go through, and it is a thoroughfare to not really a thoroughfare, but it certainly is a means to go through to another subdivision. So we'd be very interested in completing this process and in having the council consider turning our streets over to the public. Any questions? I do have a site map of our subdivision in case anyone's interested in that site map.
I'll have you give it to staff.
All right. Thank you very much.
I think we have a question.
Very
for you.
simple question, but is it a gated community? It is not. Okay. And do you have any idea why it was built as private streets?
Well,
Just owner
the
city
developer's
code
no
or-
longer in presence. The streets were, I believe, built in '85, so at that time, I guess they thought it was a good decision.
Thank you.
If I recall, it used to be advantageous for the developers to do it. They built to a lesser standard, less cost. It made it easier to sell the homes. New people were moving into the valley in the hordes and had no idea what that meant, and recognized a private street, thought it was going to be better for them, better for their family, and the practice just continued until things begin to deteriorate and home builders begin to disappear and standards kept changing. And as the Disability Act kept growing, the standards become more and more expensive just to meet some of those requirements. So I think it's kind of a package deal that's just come together over time that in the beginning served many people well, but has become a nightmare for many now. And I think this is a good opportunity to hash out and send staff forward with some directions, because I think this is going to take several departments. I think not only the street department, legal department, planning department,
Water,
probably
public
neighborhood
works.
services, public works, and we're going to have input from all of them. And I'm sorry to say I don't think this is going to be a fast solution for you, but hopefully we'll come up with a good package deal that will take us forward into the future. So I'll turn it over to you. Or did you have any more questions? I'm sorry.
I just
didn't mean
wanted
interrupt.
to understand a little bit better the scope of the issue. How many of the private streets would you guess are gated, and how many of them are not?
The ones that are gated are HOA.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman, I think there's probably, I would say, less than 50%. That's probably a fair number. Keeping in mind that I had come up with 10% before, and doing the evaluation, we came up to around 10%. So I would fair to believe that we do have between 10 and 40% of the areas gated. So that's a fair number.
Certainly the ones that are being built today and in the last, I would say, 10 years, a large majority of them are gated. All the newer private streets tend to be gated. And in the infill areas, there's almost no way to build some of these developments without them being different widths, and that's been a big challenge for infill development.
And we have some information in an agenda item later today that might be of interest to folks here about some of the tensions between width. And could you talk about some of the issues that people run into and why they choose a private street, and sort of the costs of width, I guess?
Yeah, well, Madam Chair and Councilwoman Gallego, basically what they try to do is, again, as we've talked about, trying to maximize a smaller lot size, and trying to do a public street takes a lot more area, a lot more long area, longer and wider areas. So when you do a private street, you can try to maximize your limited land area, and so you can put more houses. And so that when you reduce your standard, you don't have to do so. That's kind of advantageous for trying to use up an infill area or a property. It's just it's a way to maximize that property and make it affordable to sell, and also for the developer to have some benefits out of that.
And then that's true in suburban areas as well, where you are trying to maximize the number of lots you can put into a subdivision, and you get more lots if you have less street, and particularly if there's an interest in gating it anyway. And so that's why people do it. It helps a development pencil, or make people to be able to make money on a particular development.
And what are some of the requirements, like the Disabilities Act, that you would face on a public street that you would not be subject to on a private street?
Go ahead. Well, first of all, again, like any of the public design standards, designs have been evolving, and as well as the private street standards, they've been evolving. So, for example, the width of the road needs to be considered. The pavement thickness of the road needs to be considered. The drainage for the street needs to be considered. Also, street lights. What type of street lights? Setbacks, because that's another issue, that when you have a private street, you can kind of maximize that setback towards the street. So there's things like that need to be considered. And again, private streets have been evolving as well with the design standards. Alan, you want to add some more to that?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, the other dimension I'd like to bring to this is that part of it was the ongoing maintenance costs and impacts to the city. So as the city has developed over the years, part of it wasn't just a density question for individual developers. The equation from the city side was, well, if we're not maintaining those, it's not adding to our expenses. We're not having to increase taxes to pay for that. That's privately something that they will have to do and maintain. And so that's why you see in a lot of the older parts of the cities, it's the city maintaining things, but as you get further north and out, then it becomes more the private sector maintaining some of those things. So that was part of the genesis from the city's perspective of why the city was okay with going with some of those private scenarios. Just as you can see, as things have evolved and there were things that fell through the cracks, it didn't necessarily materialize as envisioned. But a big part of that was lowering the cost to the city for new development as it happened.
And we have lower drainage requirements on private streets than on public streets?
There's a, Madam Chair and Councilwoman, there are some standards that they still need to meet. I believe they're still adequate for what they need to provide for the development.
Okay, so they still have to meet the 100-year,
Yes,
but
yes.
that it might be more onerous on a public street.
Yes.
One other example of where we've run into some challenges on private streets, I've personally had to work through with one of my departments in Public Works. Some of the private street circumstances don't allow our standard trucks to serve them well, and that's been a challenge for Public Works, where they've had to buy some smaller trucks to go in to be able to collect the solid waste in those areas. But that's another thing that happens with the private. Just sometimes they are also just a small, set of townhomes or something where they would have a bin or something like that for collection. But our ordinance requires us to collect residential solid waste in those circumstances, and that's been a challenge for John and his team.
It's interesting how different it is across the city, and it's complex in different ways across the city. So we're working now on, we have some HOAs who are private streets and cannot afford the financial burden of flood recovery and no longer want to be private so that everyone else can help pay for that, but it is complicated and expensive.
For some of these, I'm thinking of Bel Air, because Bel Air went through this process, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And they were developed in the county, which had a different standard, if I recall. And I recall that the garbage trucks couldn't get in there, and and the sidewalks were either missing or didn't meet standards. And they had to pay to do that. But was that because it was built in the county? And is that true today? Is there a standard different than ours, that if something was built in the county today, would it meet our standards if they annex it or change it?
So, Madam Chair, members of the council, so when a property develops in the county, we don't see a lot of that anymore because the county's become much more strict about the private services. So they can't get water and sewer, so they end up having to annex in order to get density. But you're right, that wasn't always the case. And so what happened in some of those older instances is the city would recognize what they had built today, and we'd make a decision that ultimately goes to the mayor and council. You have to approve all the annexations, and we would say, here's what's been built today that we are taking in. Now, what does happen as part of that is all the departments are routed as part of the annexation review process so that they can comment on whether or not they can service those areas. So then that becomes something that whoever is seeking the annexation has to try and address some of those concerns, like Public Works and those other things. What I would mention kind of globally is that the city has adopted standards for almost everything related to development that the city is going to maintain. So getting to Councilman Gallego's comment about the drainage, the city has requirements. We put on the developer those same requirements, but we offer them more flexibility in how to get there if they're going to maintain it. So for example, drainage, they'll have to meet the 100-year, 2-hour storm event, but they may have more flexibility in how to get there if they privately maintain it. Now that means they have to do more maintenance of it. If the HOA doesn't do that and it gets clogged up, that creates more problems. But that's where that flexibility is allowed from the private HOA and the private development standpoint. As long as they meet our end standards, they can do a little bit more. And where we are going to go back and revisit, like on the drainage issue, is how much flexibility we allow up front versus the maintenance costs long-term and what that does.
And my question to that is, what happens if an HOA goes defunct or defaults?
Well, and
And who's responsible then?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that is something we are working on now. I think as part of the discussion that Ray opened up with, we have had recent experience with NSD having at least one or two subdivisions where there were smaller ones where the folks thought they didn't need an HOA, and so they decided to disband the HOA, and then they started calling in complaints about the open space that wasn't being maintained that was theirs for their retention. And so right now, between streets, my department, and NSD, we are working to come up with a more comprehensive solution that includes some of this discussion as well, to make sure we're not repeating some of those same mistakes as we develop with new projects.
One more question.
You have one more
That's
question?
it, yeah.
Go ahead.
So if I were to move into Gold Key, and I go and purchase.
We'd love to have you, by the way, in District 3.
And I purchase a home, would I be told by a realtor that I would have to maintain my street? Well, I mean, I'm just saying, because then I purchase the home and I'm asking, why isn't my street not being maintained? And then I find out I own it privately.
Well,
or it's
it-
so
I
how does
think it
that
would be
dynamic
on,
sound?
in the public report that you're entitled to see.
Of course, but you know.
You might not be told by your particular realtor,
I'm
but I
just-
mean, in the public report, it says this is a private street that has a public access easement, and private streets are, the property owners are responsible for the maintenance, right? I mean, John, is that, when you say our titles are clouded, is that kind of what you mean?
John, back up the mic.
When the title company does the research, the other thing about the public report, they also say that your lot number of the subdivision. So when they do their research, they go back to the plat, and the plat has language back in 1976 which says there's easement dedicated to the city of Phoenix for the maintenance of and repair of the roadways. So in Gold Key, if the realtor and the title company are relying on the plat, then the purchaser is not informed. Now, I don't know how people would treat this going forward, because all but a few people should be aware of this now, but.
Got it.
I would say from the calls we received in our office, people who live on a private street do not know what that means.
Yeah.
Is that consistent with the calls you receive as well?
I would assume that, and in purchasing a home, now that I know all of this, Rick, I know to go back to look for the plot and everything else to see what it says, and I'm very curious of what mine says now.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to my colleagues. I think this has been a great discussion. To admit, it's been kind of interesting to see all of you grapple with the issue that we've been grappling with for quite a while in District 3. I want to thank my friends from Gold Key Racquet Club for your patience throughout this, and a great presentation today. I think you've really enlightened. I'd like to thank a lot of people, and via the internet and Channel 11, even more people, about your situation. And also our friends from Tamarack, thank you for coming. And I think both of these instances, they're different, but they share some similarities, and that's the fact that these aren't private streets that are gated. Not only are they not gated, but they're actually being used, in the case of Tamarack, by the parents are driving through there whose kids are going to school. And Gold Key, both Gold Key Racquet Club that people are driving into, people who do not live in the community but are members there. And then we know a lot of people go to the Shaw Butte Preserve trailhead right there, and that is an obvious way to go to get in there, is driving right through your community, setting aside the issues of our City of Phoenix vehicles that go across a lot of private streets and do cause damage to them. But so thank you to both groups here to kind of make this, humanize this issue, which I hope was helpful for everyone here. And I'm happy also that that has led us to look at this policy again. I mean, it's from 1986. A lot of things have changed, and I think the one that I might ask a couple questions about this that is huge in this discussion is the ADA. The ADA didn't exist in 1986. And if you have someone in one of these communities who could use, the ADA, that's great. But I think for one of the major reasons that's in there is for the entire community, so that if anyone from the entire community who is in need of, the ADA accessibility can use it. So to me, that's very much a public benefit. I think to latch on to what Councilwoman Williams mentioned. And to that point, Ray, roughly of these numbers that we're talking about here, to get these streets up to code, what percentage is just the ADA to get up to ADA code? Roughly, I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, I would say between 20 to 30%. I mean, it's a fair amount, and it also depends on the width of the area. So and just kind of add to sort of what you talked about, ADA, streetlights, what John mentioned. I mean, there could be a possibility to look at a design exception, but it needs to be agreed upon. It needs to be looked at from an engineering standpoint, to look at a design exception where maybe in some areas that has sidewalk, maybe the other side of the street doesn't have a sidewalk. There could be some compromises there, and looking at a design exception process too.
And I would suggest that's something, both, either the design exception, which I'm not crazy about. I'm more sort of aligned to, we ought to be following the federal law, the ADA, and that's not something that the folks in this community should bear the full brunt of. But I think both of those should be on the table. Also, street lights. That is in there in the current policy. They have to add street lights. Well, if you look at that, you can see Gold Key is right up against a preserve. And again, since 1986, there's been a real growth in the Dark Skies initiative. And I think if the folks in that community would choose to not have streetlights, that's probably a positive. But again, I think maybe we ought to work some flexibility in there that does not exist. Right now, they have to put the streetlights in. I think this issue of gate, we should look at that as a possible addition. I mean, if a community is gated, I don't see how. I don't see what the public benefit is there. I mean, it's very limited, but if they don't have a gate, so if we're looking at how can we kind of curtail this and corral these numbers a little bit, I think we should look there. Also, this issue, obviously, of the default HOAs, unfortunately, that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue, and that's not addressed at all in the current policy. Obviously, Alan said they're starting to look at that, but we need to address that. We're going to continue to face that. Because right now, under the policy, if a private street was built after 1986, we won't take it. Right? So, I mean, we can just imagine what sort of nightmare scenarios could occur. So I think we need to consider when we would take streets after 1986 in very limited circumstances. So those are, I mean, to me, those are, oh, and then also the other thing, again, not to pick on Gold Key here, but there are, setting aside all that other stuff, there are some very unique circumstances where their proper notice was not provided, where I think, there would be either, the city would participate somehow in paying to get these streets up to code, or they would pay a higher amount maybe than others. But I think there needs to be sort of a, some kind of a catch-all that addresses a very, a highly unique situation. There may be others. I mean, first of all, do we know at all, is there another situation, is there another neighborhood in the city of Phoenix with private streets with no HOA currently?
Oh, yeah.
There's probably some.
Okay.
Yes. I happen to live on one.
Okay, well, there we go.
Madam Chair, I would also ask, we brought up the commercial situation, and right now this policy only applies to residential streets, so I would be interested in whether you think it would be advantageous for us to also address commercial circumstances, particularly, again, where there is currently public access to those areas. And the reason why it's come up for us, in addition to the street deteriorating and people not being able to pay to keep it up, and it's a public access way, is that it has economic development implications. There are parcels where we could bring in employers, but employers don't want to come in to a substandard street situation, but we can't do anything to, we have to at least overcome the constitutional issues to do anything to help in that circumstance.
I would certainly think that that needs to be included as well, and it seems to me that, in the City North decision, it would certainly be support. I mean, I think we could certainly justify, when there's an economic development perspective to work on infrastructure.
On 48th Street.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Matt, I don't mean to.
No, I think those were all the. I mean, maybe I should have started that with a motion, but I think we're not really. You know what areas we're interested, or at least I am interested in staff looking at.
Okay, I have a question. Because this is a very critical issue throughout the city, and in the meanwhile, we have people applying through Allen's Development Services. Is there a way that we can at least put some type of temporary injunction against approving those to go forward for private commercial or private if they have not been approved and are not under construction? Or am I just throwing a lawsuit right at us?
Yeah, I think you're going to run into some problems, particularly, I mean, there are, development is ramping up right now in several, both infill and in the suburban areas, and I think that will inhibit some important development moving forward. We already, for the post-1986 process, have, everybody knows what the rules are. Yes, this process could yield some improvements to our standards, but I would recommend against, like, putting a halt to, saying we'd have to lay off a bunch more people all of a sudden.
No, I don't want to do that. I just want to.
Alan, I don't.
Is there a way, Alan, when they come in and they're going to do a private development right now, are they fully aware that, one, there's different standards, and two, that we are in the process of maybe upgrading those standards that have been in place since '86?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, right now under our current requirements, we have standard plat notes and standard requirements they have to create HOAs. So part of the problem is going back to these older ones. We don't know what all the requirements were in some of those instances and how this plat got done to say you have private streets, but you're able to strike off having an HOA. That's not a requirement that we would approve. Those plats we send to you guys to approve, and so we have all those requirements in place today. So I don't think we really need to do anything that drastic to stop right now. What we need to get better on is second, third, fourth generation buyers of the homes that come in with a stack of paperwork and don't understand how things happen. Those are the ones that are stuck then footing the bills with saying, wait a minute, I thought the city was going to maintain that street. And I didn't realize that was me. And it's not so much a problem with the first generation buyers, because they get information from the developer that says, here's everything. The developer controls the HOA for a while until enough of the homes are sold, so they know a lot more. It's those buyers down the line that we're trying to figure out more a way to communicate with and make sure that as part of those requirements that it's crystal clear to everyone that that's what you're buying into, so they don't come back to us with these kinds of issues.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman?
But on a related note to that, I think we have learned a lot of things about whether people are going to maintain the property at the standards that they hope, especially after perhaps the home builder exits and there's a transition. So I do think we need to take lessons learned recently and make sure that we ask difficult questions and make sure that we do everything we can to encourage people to maintain at the standards we're saying that they will, because we've learned that doesn't always happen and that people are put in jeopardy.
Absolutely. We're making sure as part of our drainage study that we're looking at, that's going to be a big focus. And then we can also talk about it related to streets as well, because it plays into the fact of those folks down the road are the ones that really have to maintain it, and they're the ones that have to know the assessments that they're going to get levied for and what they're responsible for paying for, because that's really what creates the issue. Is if somebody doesn't do it for a long time, then it's a huge amount of money that they have to pick up. And so we want to make sure that, that our requirements are obviously very well known by the developer, and it's getting that down the line so everyone knows. We'll make sure that happens.
Because right now we're assuming that citizens who serve on HOAs have access to a lot of technical knowledge and information, and that's a high burden to ask for them.
Yes.
Thank you.
If I could, also, you know, I'm thinking of the one up north that we've had some talks with about the drainage, and the HOA didn't think it was their responsibility to maintain it, and they let the silt build up. Remember that one?
Yes.
And then they also decided that they didn't want to maintain this gorgeous landscaping, and that the city should just take that over. And because it was a turnover in most of the property owners, and therefore it was very expensive to water, et cetera, et cetera. It's very lush, it's very beautiful. And I would encourage you not only to talk about the drainage problems, but the landscaping and the other responsibilities associated with that particular area, that build out, because I think it's a real package deal, and as the generations flip, that knowledge is gone, that was lost, and the expenses continue to go up, and people are very concerned about it. I mean, just look at the increase in the water costs, everything, and they have no clue.
Yep. Madam Chairman, members of the subcommittee, absolutely. That is part of our overall approach, is to look at that, because it is something that if they're not willing to pay for it themselves, their only option is to come talk to the city, which we know that creates problems. So we're going to do everything we can, and we'll come back in the future with a report on that and some recommendations on exactly how we're going to address those issues. But it will include all those things that the city does to make it clear that in these subdivisions, it's the private entity that's the HOA's responsibility, and all the homeowners will know.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
Actually, I think we know what we need.
Or
Yeah, I think
we
we've
have,
just given
you have
directions.
directions. Okay.
We have a
And
lot of work to do. Don't make a motion
Yeah.
because it'll
Okay,
confuse us.
we won't make a motion. But could you come back to us, I would say, by the first of the year?
Can we
Report
do it
from
quicker?
Well, we've got so many departments involved.
I think by the
not
first
sure.
of the year is that we could come to your December meeting. I think November would be a little quick for us, given everything we got going.
Okay, is that
Thank
suitable?
you.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And Madam Chair, not only would we work on policy, perhaps major policy changes, but also we'll work on these individual circumstances and evaluate them and try to either resolve them within the current policies or recommend policy changes that will help us resolve them.
Thank you. All right, thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, Alan and Tom. We will go to the next item, which is Phoenix Bicycle Master Plan.
Madam Chair, subcommittee members, this item was continued off the June agenda to give you all a chance to get the information, have the report, and we've got a team here including, in addition to Ray, Tom Godby, Carrie Wilcoxon from the Street Transportation Department, and our volunteer chair of the Bicycle Master Plan Subcommittee, Feliciano Vera. And so, Ray, I don't know if you're kicking it off.
I'll kick it off. Thank you, Rick. Madam Chair and committee members, I just first would want to commend our chairperson, Chairman Feliciano Vera, in working with the committee that we had, started last year and went into the spring of this year, and did a lot of the lead work with also the city team and our consultant team. So with that, I'll pass it on to Tom Godby to provide the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. This is the comprehensive bicycle master plan. It's also online at phoenix.gov in the street transportation city page. So I'd encourage anyone that is interested to take a look at it. It's a fairly detailed document. It's a lot of good information here about our 20-year plan and what we like to do with our bicycling infrastructure. Again, like I said, this is a 20-year plan. What we're trying to do with this plan is build upon an investment that was made back in after a 1987 council action to
move forward with a bike master plan at that time, which led to a bond program when the voters approved $3 million to create our bicycle system that we have today. And about 380 miles were completed. In a few years after that, in 1995, Phoenix was identified as the ninth best city for bicycling by Bicycle Magazine. So that was quite an accomplishment back in the 90s. So what we're trying to do is improve upon what was already done with previous councils and previous staff from a few years ago. To do this, we had to make sure it was compatible with the Complete Streets effort that the council authorized, as well as the downtown transportation study. So that was a big part of the scope for this project. We couldn't do it in a bubble. We had to include input from other departments such as parks, police, planning and development, as well as several other agencies, including ADOT, Valley Metro, et cetera. So we had a lot of people involved. The consultant group, the lead consultant was Lee Engineering, and they utilized Charlier and Associates, as well as Tool Design Group, because they had extensive experience in developing bike plans, and which led us to the bike plan we have today. One of the main reasons for doing the bike plan is to promote a healthy lifestyle for our residents, giving them an opportunity to use our bike infrastructure as a transportation alternative. We feel this fits in well with the Fit Phoenix goals and other goals of trying to get people out there to use our bicycle infrastructure for not only for exercise, but transportation. A big part of the project was identifying our barriers. We do have barriers in the city that we had to address. You know, if people are going to ride bicycles as a transportation alternative, we have to make sure that we clear those barriers, make sure we have good connectivity. The consultant also met with the adjacent cities, Tempe, Glendale, et cetera, to review their bike plans so that we're coordinating with other cities adjacent to us. Part of the plan is also looking at our policies to see if things like bicycle parking requirements would be something that we'd like to do as a city to promote people using those facilities. And one of the main things is by doing this plan, implementing this plan, and having documented projects that we could move forward, it puts us in a much better opportunity to compete for any funding, especially federal funding that comes available. When we set out to do this, we first did a series of public meetings and developed two main groups: the Technical Advisory Committee, which included representatives from various departments and agencies, and the Pedestrian and Biking Ad Hoc Task Force, which included primarily bicycle advocates who advise city staff and our consultants on the best way to implement the plan and the types of projects that they would like to see. So they had pretty extensive involvement in this process. Again, Feliciano Vera, who's here today, he chaired the subcommittee, or the committee, I should say, and it was a very successful process. We had great input from all the task force members. They came from various backgrounds in terms of pedestrian safety, bicycle safety. They're avid recreational bicyclists, and also commuters. So we got a wide range of input from the group, and they did an outstanding job in support of this project. Some of the feedback we got from the group, the common theme is that there's not enough city funding to do all the projects, and we realize that. So we know what we want to do. We just got to figure out how we get there and be creative. So because we have competing interests, obviously, for our limited funding. Another common theme was that we really need more enforcement to protect bicyclists, because people want to feel safe when they ride. So we worked with the police department. They came in and talked about some things that they could do to support that. Bike lane maintenance is a big item. We want to make sure that we get feedback from the community. If we have potholes, overhanging branches, and things like that in the bike lane, that we address those right away. Also, they were looking at for us to improve our east-west connectivity in Central Phoenix, make sure our bicycle lanes are continuous, that we don't have discontinuous bike lanes, maybe before where they end before an intersection. They wanted us to do some improvement of the Sonoran Bikeway, which goes from South Mountain Park all the way up to North Phoenix. And also, we need to balance the bicyclist and pedestrian space needs as we implement our planning and design. The way the bike lane or the Bike Master Plan project was developed, we broke it up into 3 tiers. The consultant looked at priority quarters. So what you see on the screen is just a summary of the tiers. We broke it up in the short term, medium term, and long term, and identified which quarters need the most focus in terms of bridging those gaps so we get better continuity. And also a lot of segments, not only segments, but intersections need to be upgraded. For example, if you're riding on a canal path and you come across a major intersection, that's a barrier. So we would need some sort of signal control to get across that location and make it better for the bicyclists in an area that they would ride. Again, this is all detailed in the plan. Don't want to go into too much detail because, again, it's all identified there. In summary, it's a planning level estimate in today's dollars. It's about $53 million that were identified in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 projects to complete in about 20 years. Obviously, our current CIP is limited, so it would be difficult for us to pay for all those infrastructure needs with our existing plan. Therefore, what we had proposed was we looked at where we can go after the low-hanging fruit and do smaller projects, do some striping improvements. We can do bicycle detection at signalized intersections. We're going to continue that using our existing funding, operating budget, look at more overlay projects and take advantage of that where we can to put in bike lanes. But we would need new funding sources, and some of the thoughts we had is with the new transportation initiative, we can look at that maybe as an opportunity for increasing our bike program. Arizona Highway User Revenue or general obligation bonds, like what was done back in 1988, may be a possibility to designate some funding for our program. Obviously, we're always looking for federal, state funding through MAG to try to fund bike programs through CMAC or congestion mitigation funding, possibly joint agency projects with our neighboring cities or other neighboring communities, and public-private partnerships. So with that, our recommendation today is that the subcommittee recommends City Council adoption of the Bike Master Plan as a 20-year guiding document for future bike programs, projects, and policies, and as a means of securing future funding for bicycle infrastructure projects. And with that, we'd like to open up to any questions you may have. Again, we have Feliciano here and Carrie to help us out with any questions you may have.
He's better known as Mr. Bicycle.
Yes.
I don't know that I'd be called Mr. Bicycle, but thank you, Madam Chair. Before we proceed, I wanted to make sure that we recognize Haley Ritter. She was also a member of our ad hoc task force, and obviously she provided some feedback here today on an earlier item, and she definitely sounded the call for a focus on connectivity on behalf of those members of our community that have disabilities and have access needs that go beyond those of able-bodied folks. I want to just take a quick step and call attention to the timing of this discussion, and this is really an opportunity for us to regain a leadership position. In 1987, 10 years before gateway cities like San Francisco, New York, Boston were adopting their first bicycle master plans, we not only adopted our first bicycle master plan, but then we put together a program of funding to implement that. And in the intervening time, we fulfilled our commitment to the voters. We built all 700 miles of bike lanes and bike facilities that we committed to the voters in 1988. And so where we are today is at an opportunity to revisit those plans that we put together nearly 30 years ago. And so we really are due for an update to that vision, and it's increasingly critical for us, again, to maintain competitive relevance with respect to our peer cities here globally, domestically, and in providing a good, balanced set of transportation alternatives that satisfy the needs for those individuals that are traveling by car, by private automobile, those individuals that want to avail themselves of public transport, and those individuals that want to avail themselves of active transport, with bicycling and pedestrian being those two key modes of active transport. And so I think staff is certainly to be commended in terms of their work and diligence, and the committee, the task force that worked on this twice. We met every other week, and oftentimes until the power was shut down on the 5th floor. So we had many late nights working on the document that was here, and so this really is a product of their work, and that work in turn was built upon the feedback that staff and the consultants and their subconsultants solicited from the public last year. In fact, about a year ago, a year ago today. So if you have any questions of me from the perspective of the task force, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Any questions?
I want to thank you all for your work. This is a long time coming, and even before we had this particular task force, Ray and I were spending Wednesday mornings with I had the pleasure of creating the bicycle subcommittee, when I chaired the Environmental Quality Commission, and we've come a long way in a short amount of time. We obviously have a lot of work still to do and need to be creative about how we get the resources to do it, but I want to thank you for your leadership on this particular issue. I think it will be important for connectivity and for helping folks who choose not to drive or who don't have the ability to get to work. But it's also come up when we were recruiting Mobile Mini to come to District 8. They said, we care about being near the light rail, but we want to be connected to it. And it was neat to hear bicycling come up when we're trying to attract hundreds of jobs. And it was a reminder on a bigger picture of some of the things we've heard at this subcommittee when we've had individuals, particularly younger people, come and say that that's a decision that they care about transportation connectivity when they decide where to live. So I think it will have long-range consequences. And I think it does need to be a multi-departmental effort. Streets cannot do it alone. We need to make sure that planning and development is involved, our parks individuals, and public safety is a key factor, because we do hear from people that they don't always feel safe on our streets, and that some of what we've now called major corridors are too quick, or they're visibility issues. I know personally I've had several colleagues who were hit in very serious bicycle car accidents, so that has to be a really important thing, and something that is perhaps not the largest focus of this report, but is high on my list of work to make this successful. So I think.
Thank you.
Not really a question, but a comment and a thank you.
We do have 2 cards. We'll come back with Haley. Did you want to come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Chairwoman Williams. Let's see. Let me move this down so I can talk into it instead of up to it. First of all, council members, thank you so much for your support in implementing the ad hoc task force and creating the bicycle initiative subcommittee several years ago. I don't know how many, and the Environmental Quality Commission. I appreciate all those groups because they've been really just supportive of all of our needs. So I'm just having a little seizure when I'm nervous. Anyway, the Environmental Quality Commission recently announced that the Bicycle Initiative Subcommittee would be dissolved and handed over to our new panel, the Complete Streets Advisory Panel, which I'm very excited about seeing implemented, apparently coming up here on November 13th. Very excited about that. And thank you to Carrie and Feliciano and Tom and Ray and all of you guys, for working so hard on encouraging all the bicycle infrastructure here in the city. There's several other suggestions. I'd like to encourage you all to keep in mind as we implement these tiers. These are wonderful tiers. I was involved with the whole process, and it was a great experience to learn about the priorities of all the citizens. But I'd like to encourage you to include other suggestions as they arise. For example, Indian School has started with a bicycle lane between 23rd Avenue and 19th Avenue next to the 17 freeway. And I'd like to see that extended eastbound because that's an important corridor. I think a lot of these arterial roads are very, very heavy with traffic. They're almost like mini freeways. So including bicycle lanes on the major arterial roads is very, very important for the city to consider in the future. And again, I'm looking forward to the Complete Streets Advisory Panel and being involved in that process as it comes up, because this is an important step for keeping the local economy alive as well, because I know a lot of people that go to local businesses that don't have bicycle racks, for example, to lock up their vehicles. And if you didn't have parking spaces, you'd be pretty upset, right? So again, thank you for just being so on top of this, and please encourage the city workers to get going with all these plans. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Next is Howard May.
Good afternoon again. On a few of your sections of town, you have bike paths along the canal, and I have a few ideas I would like to speak with staff about in regards to making them more ADA friendly. One of the items is Glendale and 16th Street. You have a tunnel, and you do not have a quote-unquote off-ramp to get to Glendale from the bike path, and it's all gravel. I've experienced issues with that spot because of the grade when you come from the bus stop off of Glendale. And one of the things I really liked in the past was you had push buttons when you came up to an intersection on your streets.
Thank you. Do you want to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, and echo the comments of others. Thank you, Feliciano, for your leadership and the active involvement of the entire committee. Great work has been done, and thank you to staff. This is something that I'm certainly passionate about, and as I've been working on the North 32nd revitalization effort, along with Vice Mayor Waring and many folks in the community, it's really been kind of a rallying cry. And I just attended we're doing a meeting this evening on our 32nd plan, but we did a break-off meeting last night with a group at the far south end of 32nd, right there up against the Dreamy Draw and the Preserve. And that we were discussing an ADOT property that's there that we're trying to look at some additional uses. And a lot of the discussion came back to tying in bicycles, connectivity of the area. And I want to thank staff in their work to get federal funding for bicycle lanes along 32nd Street. And that's just one example of how important this is, to your point, Feliciano, that we need to become leaders again, and thanks to your efforts and others, I've no doubt that we will. One thing I did want to kind of plug in here, first of all, caveat, I have not reviewed the entire plan.
Big document.
What's that? Yeah, it is a big, but I will. I'm happy to support staff recommendation today with the caveat that I haven't reviewed it and I may have comments before it goes to the full council. But more general comments is I would like to see, and it may be in here again. I apologize. The city looking at ways to, let's say, low-cost ways to encourage connectivity. So again, there may be situations where it makes sense to have a pedestrian bridge to, over a city street, but in others, we just can't afford it. But, for example, a hawk, may make some sense, and I hopefully that, so that there's sort of a variety of tools in the toolbox of staff to work with connectivity. Again, hawk, it wouldn't be anyone's first choice, but I think it can be a great low-cost alternative. So hopefully that's something that can be addressed. And again, it may be in there. Another one too, again, coming back to my 32nd Street example, I see that, well, maybe if you could just comment on how, just give me general, broad outlines on how these projects were put into Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3.
Certainly, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, there was an extensive process, and various factors were looked at in terms of safety, connectivity. It was probably, and then once we've identified all the factors that went into setting those priorities, the ad hoc task force put a ranking number to it. So they would say, this is more important to me, safety is more important than connectivity versus some of the other factors. So we gave that task to the task force to let us know what's more important as an avid bicyclist, what's most important to you, and that's one of the methods we use. But there were probably 7 or 8 different factors that we looked at, and we went through extensive work in trying to make sure that the rankings were consistent with what the community wanted. And then we looked at cost as another factor as well, because it's great to put a project here, but if it's $20 million, then it's not likely to happen. So we tried to include all the relevant factors as we set those priorities. And probably one of the biggest ones was connectivity, because if you have a bike lane with a big gap in the middle, it really doesn't help people very much. So the big part of this project was trying to fill in those gaps and connect to major destination schools, carry the higher weight, and other community destinations. So there was a lot of work that went into it by our consultants and city staff, and we got great input from the ad hoc committee.
Okay, so, yeah.
Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, building on what Tom shared with you, we actually had I think just for purposes of time, Tom kind of just gave you the thumb notes for the Cliff's Notes version of what we went through. There were data points that were gathered at every public meeting that occurred prior to the impaneling of the ad hoc task force. Those data points, along with an online tool that provided additional data points, provided a solid base of information that was then supplemented with data that was developed internally based on citizen feedback and staff feedback on reports on what areas we needed to look at. And all of that information was then put into a larger matrix of rating factors that included, again, cost effectiveness, connectivity, equity. We were really trying to look holistically at how we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars in terms of evaluating projects, and also looking at how we make sure that we're dovetailing where possible with projects that are coming on the pipeline. So we then took all of that quantitative data that was gathered, and the committee spent, I think we must have spent a good 2 months evaluating the matrix criteria, as well as individual projects, to determine which projects would kind of rise to the top. Again, based primarily, I can say this with no uncertainty and no hesitation, based primarily on cost efficiency and maximization of impact. So we very, very much focused on that. And so then we took from the projects that began to rise up into our top 3 tiers and looked at those on just a system-wide basis. We took all that information, put it on a map, and looked at the gaps. And we were looking at we wanted to make sure that we had a strong balance of projects, because Fortunately, we have a lot of cyclists downtown, but we have a lot of cyclists in District 3. We have a lot of cyclists in District 1, District 2, District 6. The characteristics of those cycling communities are slightly different. You've got some folks like me that ride a bicycle as part of their everyday, just living day-to-day experience. But I also have a road bike, and I've been attacked by some of the trees on 32nd Street, and I enjoy riding up there to get out to the Hour of Power and some of the other rides that are in your district, Councilman Gates. And so we did have a nice blending of on the road experience, kind of feeding into that. And certainly this is by no means a finite document. It's intended to be a living document and to really just guide those investments moving forward, and to guide city staff as they move forward and look at future investments and on a funding availability basis. Obviously, I think you're aware that I'm also on the Citizens Committee for the future of Phoenix transportation, and so we are
What a
evaluating.
coincidence.
we are evaluating how we can come up with some of these funding solutions internally. So hopefully that answers your question, Councilman Gates. But again, I can stress to you that we were topmost on our mind was really how do we maximize the bang for the buck, because we recognize that we are in a period of scarce resources here at the city level, as well as amongst our other jurisdictions at the state level and at the federal level, and so we want to make sure that we are being good stewards of scarce resources.
Madam Chair, if I might, no, thank you. I appreciate that insight. I guess so. Just the one thing that I would comment on is we have the 32nd. I'll take this opportunity to do that. The 32nd Street bike project, which is we have the funding for, and it's going to start soon, which is all about connectivity. Right now, it's scheduled to end at Shea, so it doesn't get to the preserve. So I would take this opportunity to comment. I think that's very important. That's something to get us just from Shea to the Dreamy Draw. It's a very short leg. Again, I know there are lots of needs, lots of important projects, but to finish that either, not that I'm going to tell you how to do your job, but either across 32nd Street, which is ideal, of course, across the 51, but if there hypothetically were issues with ADOT, you could also go down to the frontage road and go over and get on the pedestrian bridge at Mercury Mine, which goes over the 51. So just, want to give you options and solutions. So with that, again, great work. Very, very excited to have the opportunity to dig into the entire plan and review it before we get to the full council. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We can also do private bikeways.
Oh, no, we're not going there. Not today. No. Thank you for your comments. And please, Ann, thank you so much for all the work you've done as staff, too. I know you have put in a tremendous amount of time and effort, and the whole committee has just been outstanding in their dedication to this purpose. I am very supportive of moving this forward. My only hesitation is the fact that as the Complete Streets project comes, as spatial projects come online, I don't want to be locked in exactly to Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And the way it's written, it really sounds like you're locked in. So if we could change R to maybe, or add as adjusted as circumstances change, either way, which would be appropriate.
Madam Chair, I think
in a
this could,
motion.
I think this could help you. I mean, recommendation is it is a guiding document. The reality is, just like our discussion yesterday on water, or I'm trying to think, there was another example too. It really gets implemented through the CIP, and so you'll have the opportunity to say, now that things have evolved with the Complete Streets, this project is a higher priority and needs to move up to Tier 1, or we got a completely new project we hadn't envisioned at all in the adoption of this plan, and we'd like to fund that. So either way, I think that our recommendation is it be adopted as a guide, not as a, this is exactly how it's going to move forward. But if you want to,
I understand what you're saying, but I also have learned in my many years of being around here that new council people come in and they see that list and they think that's the list. And they cannot make adjustments to that
Madam
list or new
Chair.
suggestions. And I don't want that to happen to council people coming in or to
I can
different
assure you
communities.
from our perspective as a task force, we were very cognizant of that. And so the document was drawn up, intended to work hand in glove with both the Complete Streets program as well as Reinvent Phoenix as that's moving forward, and my Plan Phoenix, or Plan Phoenix rather. And so I think that's an excellent suggestion, and an excellent bit of wisdom and counsel that you offer us.
Thank you. Okay. Do I have a motion?
Move approval of staff's recommendation.
Second.
I didn't know she
He's
was there
good.
in the air.
From the heavens.
Okay, any further comments? All right, knowing that this is a guiding instrument, do we need to add anything to this, or are we clear?
It's completely up to you all. I think we have generally enough flexibility to deal with it, but if you want to add something for clarification purposes, it's
Did we
really your
just
option.
change R to may be as follows? Is that too loose?
I don't know where it is.
I'm looking at this document that says this is the tiers.
Well, maybe we should look at what's in the actual master plan.
Oh,
Which-
that's too logical.
I'm a-
What's it say in the actual document?
Madam Chair, it says the proposed improvements with appropriate timeframes for implementation are as follows.
Right, that's what I was reading.
So what we could,
Are generally recommended as follows. I mean,
Okay,
or as
add that.
proposed, or
How's that? Generally recommended? Well, that, all right.
Accept that
If
friendly.
you would amend that to say that motion?
Yes.
And the second's in agreement? Oh, the second, are you in agreement? Why am I looking at that? See,
Up there.
Yes. Second. I'm in agreement.
it worked. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second as amended. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you
Gotcha.
very, very much.
Madam Chair.
I think we are going to move the rest of the items on here until our next meeting. We do have public comment. Howard May, you wanted to have public comment?
Madam Chair and the committee. You guys, I don't know who did this, but sprung upon me new bus tickets. I'm concerned that the colors on the reduced bus tickets, when they print the date on them, are hard for some of us that have color impairments with our vision. May not be able to read the dates when they punch them. When you had the old bus tickets, they were white with black lettering and they were easy to read. Second, you guys are getting ready to implement new bus changes. You might want to have transit staff look into have people educate people at some of the transit centers on some of the changes, like the Peoria at Sunny Slope and the changes at Desert Sky. And thank you.
Very good ideas. Thank you, and thank you for letting us know. I don't think we were aware they changed the color of the bus tickets, so we appreciate your comments. Do we have any other items you want to add to our next meeting?
A very ambitious agenda as is.
We have a very long future
We have
agenda
plenty.
list, and now we have a longer one. So we'll work with you, Madam Chair, to sort it through.
And if you have something on this list that's really a top priority, let me know, because I'll gladly maneuver.
Thank you.
All right, hearing no further business, we are adjourned.